In the next few lectures, you are going to create your very first Angular service that will fetch the information by consuming a RESTful web service. You are going to fetch all the country details, that is the country name, capital, flag of that country and the currencies, and you will build an Angular component that will render that onto the UI as follows. So go to your web browser, open up a new tab and go to a website called restcountries.eu. restcountries.eu, enter. This website exposes out RESTful APIs which we can consume. On the left hand side, you see all the API endpoints. Click on all. That will take you to the URL that you can use to fetch all the country information. So this is the RESTful URL that can be used with a HTTP GET method. So copy that URL, open it in a new browser window. I have a JSON formatter, that is why you see this formatted JSON. This has the country name and flag information, capital information, etc. So we are going to invoke this web service from our Angular service, use that Angular service within a component and render the following UI. In this and the next few sections, you will be learning how to use services within an Angular application to fetch as well as post data. And we are going to use some RESTful web services that are available over the internet. Here are the links to those services. You can download this Angular links.txt file by going to the resources section of this lecture, and we'll be using these links in this as well as the next few sections. The first step is to create a countries project or Angular app. To do that, go to the command line, make sure you are under the Angular folder where we are storing all our projects. Use ng new space countries is the app name. Hit enter and that will create a project as follows. I have already created this project to save us some time. You know all the important folders and files under this project. The next step, once you create the project, is to go into the project folder from your command line and add a service to it or generate a service in that project. You do that using ng space g for generate, s for service, space. Now that we are going to have both services and components, let's organize them into folders. All the services code will go into a folder called services, and the name of the service is countries, because it's going to retrieve the country information. Hit enter. That will generate two files for us, countries.service.spec.ts, countries.service.ts. This is the key file which we are going to modify and add all our code. We'll create the component later on when we get to it. You can drag and drop this project by opening a new Visual Studio Code window, file menu, new window, drag the project, drop it onto Visual Studio Code, go to source, and you will see app. Under it you find services, the spec file and the country service.ts. This is the file which we are going to modify in the next lecture. In this lecture, I am going to walk you through the services code that got generated in the previous lecture, and also we'll add a few more imports that we are going to use in the next lecture when we code the service. The first line imports injectable, which is a decorator that marks this service as injectable, meaning the Angular framework can inject this service into other places in the application. When we create our component later on, we are going to ask the Angular framework to inject this into the component so that we can use it. So it's the concept of dependency injection. And provided in here, root tells that use the default root injection capabilities that Angular have. There is a root module that is responsible for doing the dependency injection. We are asking that root module to take care of the dependency injection. If you want to specify a custom module, that is also possible by going to the app.modeler.module.ts. Here in the providers section, we can provide custom injectors as well, or custom providers that can inject our services, etc. But here we are using the default one that comes with Angular. And the countries component, the class has a constructor which we will be using in the next lecture. But for now, let's add some imports, starting with the HTTP module import. Import HTTP, comma, response. We'll see why we need all this when we start coding. From, within double quotes, at Angular / HTTP. Here this should be flower brackets. So we are importing HTTP, to which we are going to use to make HTTP calls like get to retrieve all the countries. Then response will handle the response that comes back from the get request, and we are importing it from Angular HTTP. Next, import map. Map is a utility function that we are going to use to map our response from RxJS/operators. So the RxJS.operators has this map utility which we are going to use. And the last import is important one, observable. Observable from RxJS. So depending on the version of Angular you are using, these components and packages that you are importing them from, these modules might change. But right now these are working for Angular 6. Map is from RxJS/operators and observable from RxJS. Again, this HTTP and response are to make HTTP calls and handle the response. The map method is to map the response back, as you will see. And observable will help us handle the response as well as throw exceptions. We'll see all that in the next lecture. We have the service and we have added all the imports that are required. The next step is to retrieve all the countries from the following URL. To do that, first we need to use the HTTP service inside the service, or the HTTP module. Inject that HTTP module by using the constructor injection. Private _ HTTP is the variable name, colon, the HTTP module. So this is a type, this is a variable of type HTTP. So Angular will create an instance of this HTTP and it will inject it into this. And we can use it anywhere within our service. Define a method called public get countries. And the return type is any. It's going to return an array of objects, or it's going to return a simple JSON response that comes back. This response will come back and it will return that. To make a HTTP call, we use _HTTP, which we have injected already. This dot _HTTP dot get, within double quotes, grab this URL, copy it, go back, paste it. That will make a get request to that URL, which will get a JSON response. Dot pipe is the method. In earlier versions, we were directly able to use map here, but we can't do that. Pipe, within brackets, we use the map method, which we have imported here. So map will map the response back. Map, within brackets, response. Use the arrow function, open and close brackets, hit enter. So we are dynamically handling the response that comes back using an arrow function. Simply return response.json. So the response will have the response, but to retrieve the JSON out of it, you use response.json. So in this lecture, you have injected the HTTP module. You have then created a method called get countries, inside which you have used the HTTP module, used a get method on it to retrieve all the countries. Then you have piped that response onto a map method, which has handled the response. It is simply returning response.json back. In the previous lecture, we have handled the success response, but it is also important to handle the error response. That is, if something goes wrong when this get call happens, then we need to handle that case as well. So right after this flower bracket, where this method, this arrow function ends, add a comma, and we are going to add one more function here that can handle the error for us. Use error as the variable name. Arrow function begins there and it ends there, within which we can throw the exception from here. We can simply log it to the console, or we can define a function that can handle the error for us. So inside the service, public handle error is the method name, and it takes the error that comes back as a parameter. Within this, we'll do a console.error that will be shown in red on the console. Instead of console.log, we are using a console.error. Error is :space plus the error that is passed in. Then we will use the observable and throw the error back. Return, this is important, return observable dot throw, and throw the error back to the next component or the next layer. In this case, the component will be invoking the service. So if an exception is thrown, it will go back to the component, and the component needs to handle the error. If there is no error, you can simply say, double quotes, if this error is undefined for some reason, we'll add a default message, internal server error. So using the pipe symbol, you can define a default value for it if this is undefined. Save it, then invoke this handle error up here, this dot handle error, and pass in the error that is being raised. So in this lecture, you have successfully handled the error or the exception case by defining an arrow function right after the map function, and you have created a handle error method that is logging the error to the console. It uses observable.throw, which will throw it to the next layer, which is invoking the services layer, and that layer should handle the error and do whatever it wants to do with it.